All right, well, welcome everyone today. We'll do a quick lightning talk on how to take better photos. All right, so the first rule, if you only take away one message from this entire talk, is get closer, right? So if you think about like the average photo of a bar, people take it from, 8 feet away, but the goal is always to fill the frame of your camera or of your, viewfinder with the image. Ideally, you want to touch three sides of the frame with the subject matter. At first, it'll feel uncomfortable because you've been taught your whole life not to like crop people's heads and things like that. But the photos tend to be much more interesting if you fill the entire frame with the subject. Uh, you know, closer, right? Like so you thought maybe you're close enough here, but even we can make chopsticks much more interesting if we're up close and personal with them, when you can see the actual texture, and again, they're filling the entire frame. We're playing a little bit with light and shadow here. Again, when you think of photos of flowers, a lot of times people try and get the leaves and the stems and everything, and they end up being just kind of boring. But if you can get really close, and the nice thing is if you're using your camera phone, the minimal focal distance of a camera phone is somewhere between like 1 and 3 inches. So you can actually shove it right up close to almost anything and get really great photos. If you get too close, it'll be out of focus. But if you keep it, like I said, somewhere between 1 and 3 inches away, and you can see through your viewfinder if it's in focus, you can get really great photos. So if you take anything away from this, take that away. Get closer. The next thing that I think is really important to realize is that everything is a lens. You can, anytime you have a piece of glass in front of you or something that's semi-transparent, stick your camera up to it, use it as a way to view the world. So on the left, the photo is actually through a beer bottle. And that one's abstract, and if you're not doing art photography, it might not be that interesting to you, but there you go. And the one on the right is through a glass guard on the second floor of a bar, right? So usually people would take the photo from above the bar, so it's not blurry, but it creates a lot more visual interest because you get all the diffraction of the lights at the bar and that sort of thing. Setting is important, right? Just an average picture of a dog, although you do see that she's basically touching 3 frames, but she looks all stoic because there's a window on one side. So one of the tricks that we're going to see again and again throughout this is using window lighting. So a window is basically a giant softbox. Like if you're familiar at all with any photography equipment, those big boxes with the white sheets on the front of them that you see in the behind the scenes photos. A softbox is just a portable window, right? So if you can put your subject near a big window, you're going to get nice soft light that's going to look good on them. Then obviously the fire in the background. So when you're thinking about taking a photo of your subject, part of the checklist is, am I close enough? Am I, and then like, what's behind my subject, right? So on the plus side for this photograph, you have the fireplace. On the negative side, you have like whatever weird debris is laying over here and distracting the audience. But these are all Instagram photos. These aren't like my portfolio type images, right? And that's fine, right? Like most of the photos we take are impromptu. And the truth is that even as a commercial photographer, I am proud of maybe 1% of the images I shoot. So take more photos, right? The more photos you take, the more great ones you're going to have. That 1% conversion rate has maintained itself throughout my career. Like when I first started, it was 1%. And then even after I've been internationally published, it's still 1%. And because as you get better, your definition of good gets tighter and tighter. When you're thinking about photography, you should always be thinking about telling a story. So this was a little triptych that I put together on Instagram, and it was from when we went and painted my grandmother's house. When you look at cinema, in photography, like cinema is just a collection of stills, right? We're playing a bunch of still images very fast. So great cinematographers treat every frame as if it's an individual photo. When you look at how they do their storytelling, 9 times out of 10, it's establishing shot, right? Take a wide shot that gives the audience an understanding of where they are in the world. take a medium shot that kind of brings in to focus the characters, and then show details that provide, you know, a flavor or a commentary on the thing. So, you know, kind of in this one, the establishing shot is the group, you know, and we got grandma there and we've got the house, and then the medium shot is my cousin Paul doing the weird face, and then the detail shot, right? We see this this roller and the detail elements there. So if you think about that as well, when you know, if you pull out your camera to take pictures of your kids or your dog or whatever, you know, think, what's the establishing shot for this room, and just go take a couple of those. What's the medium shot, and then what's the detail shot? And what that does is just gives you a way to recontextualize the room, and it'll make your photography better because you have to think in a storytelling manner. And if you can start viewing your images as each one telling a story, your photography will get stronger over time. Use Whitespace. So if you're not going to get closer, you know, like this is the opposite of that, get very far away. And, you know, you think about most times when you see amateur photos of a farmer's field, right? The horizon line is right in the middle of the frame. Sometimes you'll see it, you know, they've heard of rule of thirds. So the horizon line will be at like 30%, one way or the other. But I encourage you to like not be afraid to put it way down at the bottom. I think the best, you know, landscape photos either have the horizon right at the bottom of the frame, so you have tons of sky, or they have the horizon right at the top of the frame, so you have tons of detail in the greenery. You can make photos more dynamic and interesting using tilt. I don't overuse this a lot, but it is a kind of a quick hack to like make something more visually interesting, because your mind is like, why is that sideways? And just that activity improves the quality of the image. The other thing, you know, we talked about before is establishing shot, medium shot, detail shot. You should also think foreground, midground, background, right? So here, you know, my sandal or whatever is foreground, and so is this dandelion dog is midground, and then the background is the park. And so you're leading the eye through the image by making sure that you construct, and it also adds a sense of dimensionality in 3D to the photo. The other thing to realize is that your eye will go to the areas of greatest contrast. So, you know, even though dog isn't, you know, doing a great job of being highlighted here because she kind of blends into the grass, she is a contrasty part in the middle of the frame. So rule of thirds, this is one of the things that you hear whenever you take a photography class, is, you know, put the subject on one of the cross sections. If you were to divide your photo into 3 strips, equal strips vertically and horizontally, you should put your subject there. And again, that's a close approximation of the golden ratio, which is, you know, a very famous art discovery that basically creates a pleasing composition. So anyways, rule of thirds works, and it creates more visual interest than just putting your subject in the middle of the frame. Leading lines is taking, oh, sorry, we had a little latency action there. So with leading lines, the idea is that the lines will take the image, or take the viewer into the image, right? So usually leading lines start outside the frame, and then through perspective, they will converge to a point. This is an example of leading lines. I don't find this isn't like a very strong photograph, but it's visually interesting. And, you know, ideally you'd have a subject that was down in this lower right-hand corner that the lines draw you into. So rhythm is this concept of finding repeating patterns at different scales in your image. So when we think about this photo, why is it interesting? Well, you know, you have these bumps and this rhythm from the roller coasters. They're a little bit hard, but they kind of mimic some of the, bumps in the clouds. And then you also have these palm trees that also kind of have the same rhythm as the clouds as well. And you can see, you know, maybe this tower and this tower and this tower, you know, so there's variant sizes of the same concept, like same visual concept. So separation is the key to basically all portrait photography. A lot of people use light to separate the photos, but you can use contrast as well. The idea being, and then the other concept is, or you can use focus as well, right? So if you have the background out of focus and the subject in focus, then that is separation. Again, this is like a camera phone in a mosh pit taking a photo. But you can see that the artist is sharply focused, the background is blurry, and the foreground is blurry. And so that creates, it draws the eye to the detailed section of the image. It also helps that, again, these are some leading lines where all the lights are pointing at the artist. You can also see foreground, midground, background. So these concepts, you can find them in a lot of imagery once you know that they're there, and it'll help you analyze a good image versus a bad image, or why an image that you enjoy may be good or bad. If there's no rules. If you enjoy the image, it's fine. This is just kind of broadening your tool set to help you understand some of the visual language that you're interpreting. People love symmetry. So again, this is kind of following that rule of putting the horizon way low in the image. Probably could have went even a little bit stronger, brought it down a little bit, but the reflection in the water creates kind of a pleasing symmetry. And again, this follows the tilt rule and the fact that we inverted the camera or inverted the photograph after the fact to make the viewer curious as to, what's going on here. So symmetry is really valuable in that, people find it pleasing. So framing is this concept of using architectural bits or reflections or anything that creates a shape on the outside of the camera. So this is, a self-portrait, basically. It's a portrait taken by my wife over here, in a reflection, and it's framed by this negative space that's created by the helmet. And so that's an example of framing. Another classical example of framing is taking a picture through an archway of a subject behind it, right? So the archway creates the frame, or the window frame creates the frame, and you pull back a little bit to allow that to happen, and focus on the subject in between. And again, it's just another way of creating visual interest in an image. So this is the pop quiz portion of the presentation. Mark, can you identify any techniques used in this image?
Well, we got framing, leading lines, maybe.
Yeah. Those perfect. I mean, there's other stuff too. I don't know if there's. What else do you see? You grab anything else?
Well, there's color contrast. Focal point.
Yeah. Where's the focal point?
I would say it's off in the distance there.
Yeah, so it's another example of rule of thirds, right? So this is right there. So you can see all this stuff kind of builds together over time. I think another thing to point out here is the motion blur, right? A lot of people always fight motion blur. I find it two ways, right? They either use it too often or they don't use it at all, right? And they always want perfectly tack sharp. But this is a kind of a abstract image, just showing you the feeling of being on a train, right? And the train's moving, and so that gives a sense of motion to the image. And I think it's worth keeping. I think this image would be more boring. And again, that's the idea, right? Like, this isn't like tack sharp. It isn't the most beautiful image, but it does tell a story, right? You're on a train, the train is moving, it's doing all of these different things. If you had it perfectly sharp and no motion blur, that'd be a different image. Would it be a better image? I don't know. I mean, it depends how you pulled it off, but just something to consider. So another thing that I see all the time as a mistake in people's photography, or I mean, it just makes their photography less interesting, is they always take photos from head height from an adult, person. And there's a lot of value in getting really low and getting close, especially when you're taking pictures of dogs or children, to get to their height or their level or any kind of small animal, whatever, but getting down low to their vantage point creates a lot more visual interest in the photo, and it also makes them larger, right? So it's easier to take up or hit 2 or 3 corners of the frame with them, and it's more visually interesting to adults because adults don't spend a lot of time at that height level. So this I didn't waste a dozen eggs for this photo. I dropped a dozen eggs, and rather than cry over the fact, I went and grabbed my camera, which was my phone, right? The best camera is the one that's with you, and I made it into some version of an art project. So the opposite of getting low is getting high, right? Like if you can get onto a roof, even when a secret I learned from a great commercial architectural photographer is he never shoots photos of buildings from eye height. He actually would always climb up on a ladder and take the photos from a ladder. And that little shift in vantage point isn't that perceptible unless you're looking for it, but it really does create a stronger image for whatever reason. There's a magic to it. Even taking a picture of your house, like pull a ladder out front and go stand on the top of the ladder when you take the photo. But yeah, so again, visually interesting because it's not a vantage point people usually have. Black and white photography is something that people often overlook, but it's a just a second. I'll talk to my daughter. Hey, mommy will help you. Go. So a lot of our understanding of imagery or our understanding of the chronology of imagery is based on color, right? Like you think of the 70s and you think of those green and orange tones. You think of the 80s and there's some of that blue and pink, and the early 90s was all the day glow colors. If you strip away that color information and are left just with the black and white in contrast, it creates more of a timeless image. And so this is a picture that you can tell from the background was taken not from these buildings. It was at least taken sometime past the 1970s, but the classical architecture makes it so that it could have been taken earlier than that, and it obviously it was actually taken 50 years later than the 70s. It was taken somewhere in the 2010s, 2020. Get weird. I used to collect. So I was a commercial photographer that shot a lot of bands, and I used to collect all my outtakes because I would take a lot of photos from like inside of the mosh pits and venues and things like that. And sometimes you get weird trailing light signatures and just weird images that would come out because if you take enough photos when you're getting bumped around, you get interesting stuff. But I always thought that those happy accidents, the abstracts that you got out of that were fun and interesting. So this is just an example of a collection, right? This is inside of a venue. This is at a concert. You can probably gather that if you looked at it quickly, but I just thought it was visually interesting. And so I think that's another thing to train your eye for is to look at stuff more abstractly and think about light, finding little pockets of light. Like I always put myself in cat mode, right? Cats always creep into the little pocket of light next to the windowsill. And that's a great way to view yourself as a photographer. Like look for the differences between light and dark and try and place your subject in them because it'll create more visually interesting photos. Same thing, right? Get light. You can use the sun as obviously like a very strong light. I like to use it as a rim light, and that's what this is. So a rim light, your key light, your main light is usually in front of your subject, and the rim light shows the edge of the subject. And so in this case, I had a fountain, which would have been a very kind of boring flat photo if I just took a picture of a fountain. But by putting the sun or the fountain between the sun and myself, you can see all the rim lighting on the individual water droplets, creates much more visual interest. It's actually, when you think of the like consumer DSLR cameras that have a flash on them, I always tell people that's really the only time you should use that little flash that pops up, is put the sun directly behind your head, like if you're taking a selfie, or behind your subject's head if you're taking photos of them. so that you get that strong rim light, and then use the flash to compensate for the difference in light behind the background and your subject, and you'll get these great portrait photos using that technique. But you can do it with, my smartphone doesn't have a flash, especially not one that's going to compete with the sun. So this was just, the sun is so overpowering, and it's actually reflecting off of the cement on the ground and creating some understanding of what, the front of the objects look like. Okay, so these are my tricks for taking group photos, and my tricks for just making sure you're getting the best photos possible in the situation you're in. So if you have a group of people, it's always hard to get them to have all their eyes open at the same time. So the trick is to actually have everyone close their eyes, and then you count to 3, and you tell them to open their eyes on 3. So you count to 3, 3, 2, 1, and then you wait a beat because people process slower. And then basically on what would be 4, you take your photo. And what that does is it suppresses people's urge to blink because they just had their eyes closed, and generally you don't blink immediately after opening your eyes. So that's a great way to quickly get group shots and not have to take 15 of them. When you're taking portraits of people, there's this brief moment where they engage with the lens before they get like a really kind of stilted look on their face that's very I don't know, it's less pleasing. And so if I'm taking portraits of people, I actually get them posed, and then I tell them, okay, remember where that is. Now look away, turn your head, and then look back at the camera and pretend that you're seeing someone you love for the first time all week, right? But bring your head back to that preordained position, but look away and then look back. And we do that, and there's this moment, tell them look right in the lens. And when they do that, there's a slight like hint of a smile. There's a connection directly from them to the viewer through that lens. And it's just a really great way to get more organic looking headshots. As a photographer, oftentimes you will get tunnel vision on the thing that you were trying to shoot and trying to get an image of, and you will miss amazing images that are behind you. For example, like one time I was at a canyon and I really wanted to shoot the sunset at the canyon, and then I turned around after that and I realized it was a full moon and I had missed this incredible image of the moon, just coming up over the trees, and it was huge and it would have been an awesome photo. And I didn't get great images of the sunset because actually like it just wasn't my day, but I learned a lesson. And I see that all the time. So anytime you're at like a popular tourist destination or whatever, and there's the like canned photo that you feel you should take, like take a moment and look around you, and there might be something more interesting than the picture of the Louvre. What I usually tell people is like, if you're doing travel with your family, never take a photo without one of them in the image, because at the end of your life, you don't care about the photo you took of the Louvre. You care about the story. You care about being with your family there or that moment. And so if you want like a really excellent picture of a famous landmark, like just go online and download that copy and put it in your photo book, because chances are that photographer, spent a year trying to get that image, waiting for the perfect atmospheric conditions, or just happened to be there at the right place at the right time. And they're really well trained. So you can complement your very personal photos that tell your family's personal story with really professional images, thanks to the internet. All right. And learn to see light. That's what we talked about, being a cat, walking around looking for the little pockets of light and taking photos in them. The better you get at understanding or being able to see light as its variance, the better of a photographer you'll be, because photography actually means writing with light. It's photography. Take more photos. There's a famous photographer who said, go take 100,000 images, throw them all out, and now you're ready to start being a photographer. And it's very true. I feel like there's still much for me to learn individually, and I probably have 100,000 photos under my belt as far as exposures go. So just keep shooting. And then going back, Chase Jarvis says the best camera is the one that's with you. We all have really awesome smartphone cameras, and it's amazing technology in your pocket. So use it. Don't worry about buying the latest pro gear. Your camera goes toe to toe with all of that, and the secret is to be there and take photos. All right, thanks. That's it.
Hey, thanks. Good job.
No
I
problem.
learned a few good things to take with me.
Awesome.